Hello, people of the internet, and welcome to another Film Noir review. I'm your host, Andres Perez, aka Kaiju Noir, and here with me, of course, is my fellow Film Noir connoisseur, Matthew Denian.
Hey everybody, eager to do another review for you guys with my good friend Andres. We love doing these, don't we?
Absolutely. So by the time you are listening to this recording, hopefully all the episodes of our history of Godzilla in animation videos have all been released, and so far as of this recording we have released the first 3 episodes, and it looks like we've had a huge amount of success and a large amount of positive support and reception towards those videos, and we're very glad you guys enjoyed them. So now that our look at Godzilla's animated history has been completed, let's go back to what you and I generally love doing from time to time, which is taking a look at film noir films, film noir movies, I guess, that have permeated throughout the history of cinema. Now, we've actually gone back and started out with the more popular film noir examples of film noir, those being The Maltese Falcon and Double Indemnity. But this time around, we're taking a look at one that has certainly gained a lot of recognition from the film community, but isn't really exactly as well known as the first 2 movies that we previously covered. So what is the movie that we are going to take a look at today, Matt?
Well, it fits both in terms of what we're doing, because in the name we're taking a little detour from 1945. It's a film directed by Edgar G. Ulmer and based on the novel of the same name.
Right, so we're taking a look at a low-budget film noir movie from 1945. It was one of the many films that were released as from a string of lower-budgeted, smaller movie studios known as Poverty Row. So this wasn't like a big-budgeted extravaganza like Detour, but a Double Indemnity, but rather Detour is one that you can consider as a B-movie film noir. And it's kind of interesting to take a look at something like this, because when you hear the term B-movie nowadays, you tend to think of like low-budgeted horror movies or sci-fi flicks, and not like film noir itself. But yeah, we had like numerous movies of numerous genres that came out of the B-movie studios, out of Poverty Row. And so this was one of those movies that came out in 1945. It had a small amount of its success, where people were like, hey, that's pretty good for a B movie, and really exceeded people's expectations. And so now, many years later, it wasn't until the 70s, I want to say the 60s and 70s, and definitely by the 80s, it had gained a large following, and eventually in 1992, Detour was selected for preservation in the United States National Film Registry by the Library of Congress, which, as you know, for those who don't know, the National Film Registry is one of those places where they preserve movies that they believe are culturally, historically, or aesthetically significant. So they take the movies that they feel should best be remembered and keep them safe for as long as humanity continues to exist. The movie has been released, has fallen into the public domain, so it's freely available online and on DVD as well. And actually, I came across this movie through my college years, where actually I took several courses on the history of film classics, where we take a look at different genres for each decade of cinema, and my professor actually chose this movie to represent the film noir genre. And funny, I think I'm very grateful for my film professor, because if it weren't for him, we actually wouldn't be talking about this movie right here, because up until now, you yourself had never even heard of Detour, right, Matt?
I know. I was going to say the same thing as you just said. Yeah, I'm glad your film professor pointed out to you as well, because I had not heard of this movie. When you mentioned it to me, I looked it up. It did come up on quite a few lists of like the best noir films out there. Mm-hmm. And you sent me a link to it. I thoroughly enjoyed the movie, so I'm looking forward to reviewing it with you now.
Right. So the basic outline for the story of Detour is that we have our piano player, our main protagonist, Al Roberts. He's a piano player who works at a very small like music jazz club, and he eventually wants to marry his girlfriend, but his girlfriend has dreams and aspirations of becoming a star in Hollywood, so she eventually leaves New York and goes to California.
Yeah, there's actually a great scene, Andres. I was
Hmm.
wondering if you caught this too, where after they introduce the characters, they definitely have a song that's like their song, if you will.
Right.
The song is "I Can't Believe Somebody Like You Loves Somebody Like Me," something along those lines.
Yeah, yeah.
And anyway, as they mention that they're going to get married,
Hmm.
and as they're walking out of the nightclub, it's nighttime, but it's still fairly bright. But as they're walking, a fog definitely starts to creep in,
Hmm.
and as the discussion goes, Sue is telling Al that she wants to not get married right away and go to Hollywood and try her hand, if you will, at becoming a starlet. And I just
Hmm.
thought it was really neat that as the fog thickened and it became more difficult to see what was going on with these two characters directly, it
Hmm.
seems that their future was becoming more foggy at the same time.
Oh, okay. I never even noticed that, but I thought we saw that as like more of an atmospheric choice. But that's a very good use of foreshadowing right there that you
Yeah.
caught. So eventually she left, and Al is pretty miserable without her because she was the only reason why he was ever happy working for chump change at that small nightclub. So he eventually, yes?
Right. So yeah, he makes references to the fact he liked perform at Carnegie Hall, and in a few spots he's even like kind of playing classical music instead of jazz music
Hmm.
when she's not around. So he definitely, it seemed, was happy when she was there, like you said, but without her there, he feels very empty and without much direction.
Right. So he decides to hitchhike his way to Hollywood in order to meet with Sue because apparently she is, I forgot what, a chiseler? No, no, not chiseler. What was it? The word that he uses to describe what she is doing now. But I really, a hay slinger?
Yeah, Hayslinger. I couldn't find any reference for what that meant.
Yeah, I have no idea. Like, is that like considered like waitress work or rest like retail work? I'm not sure what he was referring to since this was the 40s, and so their English slang has is much different from ours
Yeah.
today.
It certainly wasn't something that she wanted to do because he makes the reference that
Hmm.
they don't know what they're missing out on out there, those Hollywood bigwigs type of thing. So it's not something that's involved with what she's wanting to do, it seems.
Hmm. Let's see. So he eventually begins hitchhiking and gets all the way to Arizona. At that point, he meets a shady individual by the name of Charles Haskell. And Charles Haskell, he decides to give him a ride, and in sort of almost like a Faustian deal with the devil sort of situation, he ends up getting more than what he bargained for when he eventually comes across the dead body of Charles Haskell when they switch positions, and he's the one driving while Charles passes away in his sleep. So he realizes that if anyone sees him with Charles, he will most likely be accused of of murdering Charles. So he decides to take his identity and take his belongings, his clothes, his driver's license, his car, and everything, and leaves the body out in the desert. Un-
Yeah. Go
Mhm.
ahead.
Unfortunately, things go from bad to worse when, by pure random luck or pure random chance, he comes across the ex girlfriend sort of individual that Charles mentioned prior to passing away in the form
Right.
of the devilish woman known as Vera. And so she kind of blackmails Al into accompanying her in order to get out of this, have both of them get out of this situation alive. But things only get progressively worse when she has a larger and larger control over Al as he struggles to do what's right while also kind of tainting his soul and getting deeper and deeper into this murky situation.
Right. Al's an interesting character because in a lot of like noir situations, people find themselves in difficult situations because they're contriving, whether it be for better or worse. Where
Hmm.
Al just seems to suffer from paranoia, perhaps, and that's kind
Hmm.
of what leads him into these situations. As you stated,
Hmm.
he's driving with Haskell, and kind of like in this Jawsian type scene, if you will.
Hmm.
Haskell's going over the scars he has
Hmm.
on his arm, two of which are like cuts on his hand, which he says that this girl gave to him that drove with him all the way from like I think Louisiana maybe,
Right. Oh,
and
right, right. Yeah.
anyway he says he threw her out, and then it comes to light that Haskell has another older scar on his arm that
Hmm.
he occurred. he was a young kid, and he and his friend were sort of dueling with some swords, I guess, that Haskell's father had.
Mm-hmm.
And Haskell accidentally took the other kid's eye out.
Mm-hmm.
Now, in this process, he was cut on his arm, but it was at that point that he went out on his own, so that most of Haskell's family is really unaware of what happened to him, which comes up later in the film.
Right.
At that point.
Mm-hmm.
But like,
go ahead.
I was going to say, but like you said, the real crux turning point is that as Al is driving, Haskell seems to fall asleep. He can't wake him up. He pulls over the side of the road when it starts to rain to put the hood up because they have a topless car, and Haskell falls out of the car dead. And this is where Al decides, has this sort of irrational fear, I would say, that he's going to be accused of murdering Haskell. So he drags him into the desert, takes his clothes, takes his address, takes his identity rather, as opposed to just waiting till help came along or finding help and explain his situation.
Right. Like, even though this was 1945, I have a feeling that the autopsy reports could have at least proven that he did not like strangle Haskell or beat him up or anything like that. He didn't like cause any physical harm to him, and that maybe he would have died from like some sort of natural phenomenon in his body.
Right. I get it. That seemed a little odd to me, but I guess it kind of plays into what we see as Al's character going forward, and that he's paranoid, and certainly he's definitely a weak character.
Yeah, he seems to be like very meek, and he's kind of like easily falls apart, and which is like the perfect kind of person for Vera to take control of.
Right. And Vera being the person that was with Haskell for a little bit, he kicked her out, and Al just happens to pick her up further on down the road as he sort of assumed Haskell's identity.
Right. It's really funny how I love this moment where he mentions that fate has a funny way of dealing with some people, and that he feels like it's just nothing but bad luck. Where one of my favorite lines in the movie was, "That's life. Whichever way you turn, fate sticks out a foot to trip you." So it's like, it seems like while this movie does play on the fears of paranoia, this movie also seems to be toying with the idea that life sucks. Life is constantly throwing curveballs at you, so you either have to sink or swim in these sorts of situations.
Yeah, but it's his own like terrible decisions that place him in this setting. It's
that
not
is
just
true, yeah.
bad luck.
Yeah, true, yeah. Especially with the whole idea of taking his Haskell's identity, which only further makes him look guilty, especially when Vera refuses to believe his story.
Right. At first, Vera doesn't let on that she knows what's going on, and then it's kind of a really cool scene where she's like half asleep and snaps out of it and just looks over at him and says like, "What'd you do with Haskell?" He's like, "What?" I was like, "What are you talking about?"
I love that. It's like at that moment where like Al was like, "Oh shit."
Yeah.
Yeah. It's almost kind of interesting that he would pick in that way, sort of sense, because he made the worst possible decision in that moment, simply due to out of fear and paranoia. That in a way, Vera is kind of like her there to, in a way, serve as like punishment for Al for making the worst decision possible. It's like It's like, oh, you think you can get out of like, it's almost like fate was looking at Al and saying, oh, you think you can get out of this so easily, huh? Well, I'm just going to have to throw this little obstacle in front of you.
Right. To the point where I mentioned to you before we started recording, when I first watched the movie, it wasn't until I finally saw somebody else acknowledge Vera that I wasn't so sure she wasn't just a manifestation of Al's guilty conscience, that she's there. But other people do acknowledge her, so she is an actual character, and not just somebody that came up.
Although that is a very interesting interpretation, where what if like Vera is not actually a real person, but is just there to constantly taunt, and further push Al towards the brink of insanity, or as a result of his guilt for what he had done.
Yeah, because she's downright vicious to him. It's not just like she's not the kind of sly seductress we've seen in The Maltese Falcon and Double Indemnity.
You could say she was rather savage towards Al.
Oh, very nice.
For those who don't know, her actress's name is Anne Savage.
No relation to the Macho Man, as far as we know.
As far as we know, yeah. It's like, hey, that's my great aunt right there. She was in the movie business before I ever became an entertainer. I dedicated my performance as Spider-Man for her. Yeah. But well, yeah, I really enjoy Anne Savage's portrayal of Vera. I like at the very beginning, she seems to be this very innocent, downtrodden, down on her luck individual that Al takes pity on initially. But she seems very cold, very distant. She seems like someone who has gone through a lot of trouble and just wants, a break in life. And yet, the moment she reveals her true identity to Al, her eyes just snaps at him.
Yes.
And immediately you realize that she is much more powerful of a figure than you initially thought. She is not weak. She's not looking for help. And she's like one of those people who she gets what she wants, even if it kills her, which, as we later learn by the end of the movie, is a character trait that is most certainly true.
Right, right. So what she does is lays out to Al this plan to Al basically just wants to drive the car that is Haskell's car into a big city and just leave it there and move on. And she tells him, "You're an idiot. That's a Bentley car is a calling card for the cops to look for some foul play." So she suggests he should sell the car, and in fact tells Alice like, "Well, I'll split it with you." She goes, "Yeah, darn right. Well, I'll take 100% in my split." Just lays it out. And constantly threatens to let the police know what he's done if he doesn't do what she says.
Right, right.
So they do arrive at a car lot, and Al says, "Let me do the talking," and she lets him talk for about a minute, and then tries to take over the conversation. To the point where Al's almost going to sell the car when she storms in and pulls him back out of there. And that's the next turning point in the story, right?
Right, right. And you can tell that it might have not been possible for him to actually sell the car because he knows little to nothing about Charles Haskell's financial situation in terms of his insurance policy, the company that he has insurance with, the history that he has with the car, what kind of model it is, any sort of information regarding Charles himself and his history with the car. It seems like he kind of, by putting himself in the guise of Charles Haskell, there is no way to really escape it other than just straight up abandoning it without thinking things through, which is kind of what he does at the end of the movie.
Right.
Yeah. So it's kind of interesting that it seemed like he was in a no-win situation. He couldn't really sell the car, and he couldn't really get rid of Vera without doing something drastic.
Right, and then the situation worsens when Vera learns that the real Haskell's father, who's extremely wealthy, is near death and is looking for the missing Haskell. So she comes up with this idea that Al will impersonate Haskell once the father dies to try to put himself in a spot where he can inherit the father's wealth. And then he and Vera are planning to split the wealth, or that's Vera's plan at least.
Right, right. And Al's paranoia once again catches up to him, and he realizes 100 different ways that this plan could go south real badly. To the point where it's he doesn't know anything about Charles. He doesn't know anything about relatives, anything about his birthday, or any sort of relationship he has to other people, what his best friend was, what his childhood's favorite places were. He felt like there was no way he could possibly do it. And even if Charles's father was on the brink of death, there was still the rest of his family that he would probably needed to interact with in order to execute the plan.
Right, Al makes the comment he doesn't even know what his middle initial stands for.
Right, right. Yeah, yeah.
It's really not. It's a definite change from, say, what we just reviewed in Double Indemnity, where the plan really was pretty well thought out, and it was just kind of one bad turn that, set it off the rails, so to speak. Yeah. But in this case, it's just a bad plan from start to finish that these two people are trying to pull off.
Yeah, yeah. And I like how, once again, paranoia is another theme that plays into this movie as much as Double Indemnity.
Yes. And there were some interesting turns in this film as it went along. For as mean and as vicious as Vera is, she does on a few occasions sort of try to hit on Al, if you will, or is suggestive towards him. She says, I'm going to get the shower first. and just kind of like leaves it at that. Or like, she reaches out to him like, I'm feeling tired. I think I'm gonna go to bed. And Al just completely like ignores any advances that she makes or is unaware of them, one way or
Right.
the other.
Yeah.
That being, he does kind of comment that, she's not super pretty, but pretty enough, although he's definitely still in love with Sue, who he's trying to get to. So that plays into it as well.
Right, right. And I do get the feeling that she really wants to manipulate Al to the point where he wants to make him her own like pet or her own boy toy, her own like, companion for her. We don't know anything about what she's done, but through her fast talking speeches, it feels like she is someone who has gone through a lot of trouble in her life, and that these sorts of experiences have kind of turned her in, like soured her and kind of turned her into this very like vicious, curmudgeoned woman who doesn't trust a single person and has been screwed over so many times that she wants just a single break in life, and is willing to do anything to accomplish that. And yeah, I do see that. There is points where she makes advances towards him. She places her hand on his shoulder, but he just
Right.
shrugs it off, making her angry and immediately reject her. But there are moments where it's like you could tell that there is like potential for a good person there who just is like, she's just someone who's like desperate to get a break, desperate to find a friend, so desperate to find a man. But she just goes about this in the most hostile way imaginable.
Right, like to the point where he says the room's hot, and he goes to open a window, and she, immediately forces him to shut it just to have that control over him.
Right, right. She is obsessed with that control over Al.
And as far as her brains go, they do make a few references to the fact that she might have tuberculosis, but they don't really go into it all that much.
Right.
Like at one point, she's coughing, and Al makes a comment that somebody, I guess it's an actress, I didn't catch the name, had a similar cough, and she had the consumption, he says. So she kind of brushes it off. But later, as her plan is looking like it might unfold, Al says like, he's going to hang if this happens, but he'll take her down with him. And she says something to the effect of, it's still the rope for me. It'll just be shortening my trip, or something like that. So a few like offhanded comments to maybe
Right.
why she's so desperate is because she might be ill and not have much time left.
Right, right. She's like living on borrowed time, and like her time is running out, so she wants to quickly make herself as comfortable as possible before, like, make something of her life. And again, the whole idea of she doesn't have control over her lifespan, so she's trying to find control over anything else, I'd imagine.
Exactly. That's what I took from it. And somebody who's as paranoid as Al and in a bad spot is just like the perfect guy for her, or the worst kind of guy if you're him, to be
Yeah.
under her thumb, so to speak.
Right, right. And you know what? This kind of reminds me of something I learned in my history of women in cinema class back in college, where anytime, I feel like during this time, anytime you would have a woman in power, or a woman in a position of power, that woman would normally get some sort of comeuppance for her by the end. So I'm thinking, what if this was just another example where we have a very strong-willed female character who has control over the man instead of the usual, instead of like the other way around, which was the traditional way in Hollywood. And by the end, she is seen clearly as the villain. So I'm wondering if that was like an example of punishing women in power, as messed up as that sounds.
It could definitely be the case, because she would definitely have been bucking the trend as far as the way most women were being portrayed in Hollywood back then. Like you said, even the other femme fatales we've covered thus far, they're not really as forceful as Vila. They're more manipulative.
Right, but they are also like as manipulative and as powerful as they can potentially be. They are they are also seen as like as antagonistic characters, which is like a big part of film noir, where you have the beautiful woman that tries to manipulate the man, and it's the man who needs to overcome his like primal sexual urges, attraction towards the woman, to eventually come out on top.
Right. Haha.
Yeah. Zing! As Inshallah would say.
Nice.
I'm sure I offended someone just now.
Well, not me. So, say hell with everybody else.
But let's see. Oh, one thing I really want to get into was the, what was it called? I had the word for it just now. The framing device. I love the framing device here. It's like very classic film noir, where exactly, it's pretty much the same kind of framing device we had from Double Indemnity, where you have the main character in like the lowest position possible. He is, he's scarred, probably perhaps like physically and mentally. He is just downtrodden. He is extremely depressed, and he's finds himself at his lowest point. So he decides to, what's the word, divulge, to let the audience know everything that led up to that point. And so,
Right.
yes, he's at the diner. He has his drink. He's just staring off into the distance, and he regales us the tale of his tale of sorrow. And by the end of the movie, we come back to him pretty much losing everything, having little faith, and once again having his paranoia get the best of him. He decides not to pursue his dreams of reuniting with Sue, and goes off and gets himself into more trouble.
Right. In fact, it's he hears a song that he and Sue used to play and sing together is what kind of sets the entire flashback off, if you will, in this setting. But again, it's and we didn't really cover what happened to Vera when he gets to that point.
I was kind of holding off for spoilers at this point.
Okay, that's okay. I get you.
I guess the last thing I want to bring up, or unless you want to bring up the framing device.
I mean, I thought it worked really well for this film, don't you think? With the way that they set it up, where when we first are introduced to the character, like you said, he looks physically beaten down and like a shell of himself.
Right, and very hostile and violent, which makes me think, what the heck happened to this person to cause him to like snap at any sort of kind stranger willing to give him a ride?
Right. And then we're introduced to him when he's back in New York, and he's fairly well put together and polite and clean, and everything seems to be going his way more or less.
And of course, he's got like the classic first person narration. Everything's in past tense. That's really pretty much like my style of my preferred style of narration and what would you say, my preferred style in terms of storytelling, which is why film noir has always been one of my favorite genres in when it comes to movies. And one of my go ahead.
As it works so well, like in Double Indemnity, we saw the same thing, where the guy's narrating the whole thing after he's at his low point, right?
Right. And one of my favorite lines from the movie, I know I wrote it down, is when he talks about the value of money, because that is like money is also a big motivator for a lot of these characters' actions. You have Sue, who goes to Hollywood with the ambitions of being a successful Hollywood starlet. You have Charles, who we later learn, Charles Haskell, the original Charles Haskell, who was trying to swindle his father by pretending to be a salesman and get away with money, get away with like stealing money from him, so that he can open up like a company, a new company for kickstart a new company for himself.
It seemed like that changed, because Vera was under the impression that he was going to use it to fund a racetrack or a racehorse or something along those lines.
Yeah. Let's see. And then we have Vera, who abandons the idea of selling a car in the pursuit of Haskell's father's money as well. And you have Al, who is in desperate need of money and is willing to give up everything in order to get in order to have enough money to get to Hollywood and reunite with Sue. And there's this one piece of narration that I really love, where he talks about money. He says that it's this thing that people commit crimes for, died for. It's the stuff that has caused more trouble in the world than anything else we've ever invented, simply because there's too little of it, and that's the source of most people's problems.
Yeah, which especially in 1945 would ring more true than most times, right? Since it's becoming just out of the Great Depression, right? So a lot of people still relate to that.
Right. And I still feel like that is like a theme that is still prevalent today, where people are in such like poor positions that their desperation would lead them to commit horrible things just for the sake of financial security.
Right, right.
Yeah, and yeah, it was a really interesting theme that's been brought up several times here and there. You know, desperation, paranoia, comeuppance. You know, pain. What atonement for your actions. A lot of these ideas were really enticing, and as short as this movie is, it's like only an hour and 7 minutes long. It is a very engaging tale from start to finish.
Yeah, absolutely. I found myself riveted to the seat watching it.
Yeah.
I couldn't get up from it.
Now, before we go into the ending of the movie, I did want to talk about the technical aspects, which is definitely the
Yeah.
weakest aspect of this movie. And it was kind of an inevitable thing considering the low budget nature of this movie. And in fact, if you're someone who's not like as film savvy as we are, you probably won't notice these mistakes. But if you're someone who is like used to like the more more used to like the film noir movies from the more established studios, like the previous two movies we talked about, then you'll notice that this movie feels very constrained, especially in terms of its locations, because half the locations are out in the desert. And the other locations are in closed sets. In fact, the only time we ever really see like an actual physical location of Los Angeles, it's a car lot.
Yeah, that's it. With no kind of background to it, you don't see the city skyline or anything like that. You literally just see the car lot.
Yeah, and in fact, like the only time you ever really see the sky, like the city skyline, or you know what, this movie can't even afford to have like stock footage establishing shots of the city.
No, no, they don't.
Yeah.
They don't even have that.
Yeah, the only time you really see the city is during like those rear view projections where you see the characters driving in their cars, and then projected behind them is like the city, which even then looks a bit out of sync, and in some cases the lighting of the city or the desert road. Arizona desert roads does not exactly match the lighting of the people in the car.
Right, right. We also don't get any shots of New York when they're in New York. It's just the one nightclub we see.
Yeah, and maybe the reason why they use so much fog is because they didn't have any set to go with. It's just like one single like street sign and that's it. So they have to use like fog perhaps to like cover the lack of anything else in that set.
Right, it could be true.
Set. Yeah, yeah.
And then there was our favorite thing with the cars, right?
Yeah, yeah. Right, right. Where it's like one of the images was was mirrored, like they flipped the film reel on the other side, so everything is in reverse. The cars look like they're on the wrong side of the road. The driver's seat seems to be on the wrong side of the car. Let's see.
When I was first watching it, I was like, did they use a British car for this scene or something? Because the steering wheel's on the wrong side.
Right. It's like, I know they were low budget, so they couldn't have gone all the way to the UK just for that one shot. Let's see. And the majority of the sets, we have the gas station, which you could easily find one out in the middle of the desert for little money to shoot at. You had a bunch of I think 2 or 3 hotel rooms. There was like Sue's hotel room. There was the hotel that there was the restaurant that Charles went to. There was the diner. There was the last hotel that Al and Vera slept in. There was probably what was it? Maybe one more. Oh, the restaurant where they ate in their car. So it's like they didn't even have the money to really go inside the restaurant. They had to eat in their car in front of this like restaurant set, which I'm sure was a thing that existed in the 40s. So thank God for that they lived in that time.
Yeah. And they even have to order the same food because they couldn't afford to get more than a ham sandwich.
I guess so. Yeah, so everything are enclosed sets, which made things which I assume must have made things very easy for for the filmmakers to tell their story. And thankfully, they didn't really need to have a big extravagant set. They didn't need to have large action sequences, no chase sequences, no gunfights, no complex train insurance scam sequence.
Right, right.
It was just mostly character. It was all dialogue based, all character focused, and everything. All of our attention was on Al and Vera. And
right, I was going to say about 90% of the film is just those two, right? I mean, Haskell's got a small role and Sue a very small role.
Yeah, yeah, and yeah, limited characters, limited sets, limited location shots. all of it is like very cheap, but it works for this movie. And this is what
Yeah.
I love about independent, low budget filmmaking, that it encourages you to be as innovative as possible. Where it's like when you find yourself with limited resources, you have to find your way, you have to find a way to work around these restrictions and find a way to work with the low budget that you're given instead of attempting something that you clearly cannot afford to do.
But this film does it well. Like you made the comparison earlier to when we think B movies today, we think of low budget horror or sci-fi, where they really look low budget horror or sci-fi.
Right.
This film pulls it off well. Where they have a limited amount, but they make it work. To go out of genre, perhaps like the original Evil Dead, where it's definitely low budget, but they make it work. Do you know what I mean?
Right,
So,
right. Yeah, I'm trying to think of the name of that horrible sea monster movie where the monster kind of looks like a Homer Simpson covered in seaweed.
it begins with a G, doesn't it? Gonorrhea or something like that. Gonorrhea, I forget. something.
I really don't know, but it's like anyone who
Gahara? Gahara?
No, not Gihara. That's a Japanese monster.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah, the Beast from the Haunted Sea, I want to say.
Oh, Beast from Haunted Cove, maybe?
The Beast from Haunted Cave? I really don't know. But
Haunted. It looks like Haunted Cave. I'm doing a quick search right now.
yeah, Haunted Cave. Yeah, that's a different monster altogether. No, not the Beast from Hollow Mountain, although that's another low-budget, awful dinosaur monster movie.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll
Beast
take
from
your
the
pick.
Haunted. I want to say Beast from the Haunted Sea. Yes. Okay, the creature from the Haunted Sea. Yes. So this movie is definitely no Creature from the Haunted Sea in terms of B-movie productions. This was a movie where the filmmakers were smart about their budget and create a story that could fit within the confines of their resources. And one little mistake that I noticed that was pretty interesting is that at the very beginning of the movie where you see Al in that little diner, the camera pans down to his coffee cup and there's like some abrupt jump cut before the camera moves up to his face. Then you see floodlight. They do this stylistic lighting where the lights dim down and there's like a spotlight that shines on his face, except it's focused on his chin, so you can see like the cameraman must have been like, oh shit, and slowly like move the spotlight upward so it was properly positioned to highlight his face.
Oh, okay. See, the version I watched was on YouTube, so I wasn't sure if that was just a problem with the feed where it did that jump cut, but it just is in the film that way where it does that jump cut. Okay.
I'm not sure. You know what? You're right. Maybe the jump cut was not like maybe it was a result of the print itself, but it felt so weird, so clean that maybe that was like a jump cut. Where it's like, okay, we have our shot. Okay, now let's get the spotlight here so we can get this new next shot and execute it.
Right, because this was shot in a very short amount of time, correct?
Right.
Uh,
It was like they mentioned it was made within like 4 shooting weeks, or like 4 6-day weeks, or 6 day weeks. But I'm not sure if that meant that they had all those weeks to shoot the film, or that they only had like a couple of days to shoot each, a couple of days out of the work week, and then every other day they would just make sets or whatever. But apparently, according to Roger Ebert, it was made within 6 days total, which is
it's
ridiculously fast.
Yeah, that's what Ulmer said too in his interview. The director, 6 days.
Yeah, so maybe it was 6 days. You can tell they did like probably a whole lot of a whole couple, like 1 or 2 days for shooting out in the Arizona or California desert, and then a couple days shot in like the sets, and maybe a day on the car lot, maybe a day with the actress who played Sue, and maybe that could have been it. That must have been your movie right there.
Yeah, I could see that. Because they don't use a whole lot of sets. They're not moving around a lot. It's just the two actors. Like you said, there's no big shootout scene or chase scene or anything like that. So yeah, they probably could have shot this in a very tight schedule.
Yeah. Let's see. And what was one more mistake I mentioned? Oh, the dream sequence. There wasn't really any mistakes in the dream sequence, but you can even tell, like, for a dream sequence, it looked very lacking, where it's just where what was it? Al is imagining what his girlfriend must be doing at a big, nice jazz club, and he imagines her singing while you see like the shadows of three jazz players playing their
Right.
instruments on the
Right.
wall. I
They
guess
don't
they,
even
they
have
were
the jazz players. They just
right,
have
right. They were
shadows.
yeah, just their shadows. They didn't have the money to have a full jazz band, so they just showed the shadows on the wall of three of them. And they didn't have money to show the big jazz club at all. Just like have her in a nice dress standing in front of a wall. Perhaps the
Right.
dress was the most expensive thing out of that whole dream sequence.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah, yeah. But you know, they try to be stylistic about it with their limitations once again.
But it works. It
Yeah,
does
yeah.
work.
Absolutely. So now, is there anything else to talk about before we get into the ending?
Uh, not necessarily sure. I mean, the actors do a great job. I was, like you mentioned briefly, Vera's eyes pop out. She does a tremendous job, I felt like, with her eyes in this film,
Oh, yeah.
conveying anger or hatred as she's going. And then the actor, Tom Neal, who plays Al Roberts, does a really good job with his face, just kind of looking lost and downtrodden.
Sad and depressed all the time.
Sad, yeah. Like he made a movie that nobody likes type of thing and then just moved on from there. You
Yeah.
know, so
I don't think I can think of a single person who would be feeling that nowadays.
no, not in this day and age.
No, certainly not anyone we know.
No.
Anyways, what is the thing that happens by the end of the movie during the climax, Matt?
Oh, well, what occurs is Vera tells Al that they have to go forward this plan to try to pass himself off as Haskell. He points out, as you mentioned before, all the stuff he doesn't know and why it's not going to work. So she threatens to call the police. And now keep in mind, when she's going to call the police, this is an old-fashioned 1940s phone. So it has like a cord on it and a cord that runs into the wall with it.
I bet you someone is thinking, a young millennial is thinking right now, what's a cord?
Yeah, exactly. It also had, I'm really old. I remember because it has a dial. We
Yeah,
actually had a dial on it.
rotisserie dial.
Rotisserie, yeah.
Yeah, well, 4,
Yeah.
5, 6, and then like, hello, operator, get me the number of the police station.
And during this
just
conversation,
a moment, I'll connect you.
and that's all goes. There was no 911 back then.
Yeah.
So, as we're having this conversation, Vera's drunk, and she, like you said, asked the operator for the police department. She's about to call it when Al finally talks her down, and she says, "Okay, it's really hot. Can you open the window?" So he walks across the massive set to get to the window, and Vera grabs the phone and takes off for the bedroom, which is the only other room in this apartment that they're renting. So Al threatens that he's going to yank the cord out of the phone. So what we see kind of briefly off screen is that Vera sort of passes out, but as she does so, the cord gets wrapped around her neck. So as Al starts...
We should mention that she is drunk right now. She's like drunk out of
it's
her mind. So she's like tangling herself in like the cord as she's like struggling with the phone itself.
And as Al's trying to pull the cord, like kind of back under the door because it's locked, instead of trying to pull it out of the wall or kicking the door, he's just pulling on it. He does end up strangling Vera. So in this case, throughout the film, it was a key point that he's telling Vera he didn't murder Haskell. The Haskell just died, even though people wouldn't believe him. And his actions have actually led him to kill Vera now.
Yeah, so now he has a truly guilty conscience. I mean, it's one thing to steal the identity of a dead man, but now he has actually taken someone's life.
Right. Which I'm no lawyer, but I'm just a young country teacher type of thing.
Yeah.
But I feel like even that he might have been able to pass off as like manslaughter because he didn't like plan to kill her and he didn't know he was strangling her on the other side of the thing.
Yeah.
So I'm not exactly sure, but it was certainly worse that he made it worse for himself by running from the situation again.
Right.
You know.
Yeah. And so by the end of the movie, we return to the diner. We now know why he's so miserable. He contemplates about seeing Sue, but he has given up on that, on the hopes of seeing her again. He decides just to hitchhike away elsewhere. I think he was talking about, he said he couldn't stay in California and he couldn't go back to New York, so he was just going to find somewhere else to live. And he mentioned that because everyone was looking for Charles Haskell, he thought, oh, this might be my break. You know, they're looking for a dead man. They're not looking for Al. And because this was during the Hollywood day, this was during the strict days of censorship where Hollywood wouldn't allow movies to have criminals that get away with their actions. Although I feel like the movie would have been suitable, the ending would have been just as suitable if Al was, forced to live forever with this guilty conscience of his. Because we can tell, his soul is certainly like suffering from the fact that he took another person's life.
Yeah, so I totally agree with you on that. In fact, it does end very quickly with just a police car pulling up and escorting him into the car without
Right.
much.
No dialogue at all. It's like,
No.
he's like, stop, get in the car. It's like, why? He was just walking. But my only assumption for why the cop would pull him under is that maybe like the diner's owner must have called on the police because this guy was being a very rowdy individual off screen.
Okay. Right, that makes sense. It might have nothing to do with the murders that he's committed or things he committed in Haskell's case. But I agree. I feel like him just kind of walking off as a destroyed man and losing out on his one true love and his dream would have been just as fitting an ending with a punishment for him.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, but instead, it's like we technically can't let criminals get away, so they have to be punished. In fact, that kind of reminds me of like the censored ending for Scarface, because the original Scarface, which was called Scarface: The Shame of a Nation, where the main character he ends up getting gunned down by the police as he and his sister attempt to fight them off in a no-win situation. And however, the original censored ending was that he wasn't going to be shot, but rather he was captured by the cops, and you eventually see a silhouette of his body being hung at a prison. So he was like actually going through. You would see that he actually went to court and went through the process and was eventually sentenced to death.
Oh, okay. Or like Double Indemnity, where there was like that sort of alternate ending in the gas chamber you came across.
Right. Yeah. Which I'm so glad was not there, because I feel like that last shot of just like these two seemingly best friends now turned to tragic enemies was a beautiful ending for Double Indemnity.
Right, which I feel the same with Detour, that it would have been fine just to have him walk off into the darkness with nothing. That it might have been almost a more fitting ending than the cops grabbing him. But like you said, it just would have to be done at the time, I guess. So.
Yeah, and this wasn't a big studio, so they probably didn't have the budget, or didn't have like the kind of studio power that the larger studios had to convince the censorship board to have them get away with that ending.
Right, the clout to do something like that.
Exactly, yeah, that was the word I was looking for. So let's see, anything else to talk about before going, or else should we go into final thoughts?
Yeah, I guess final thoughts, right? I can't think of anything else. Can you to talk about for this film?
No, not really. I mean, overall, Detour is a fantastic movie. I'm so glad that production of this small scale was able to gain the recognition that it got, even if it took them a couple decades for them to reach that level of notoriety. This is definitely a very inspiring movie for people who are working with smaller budgets, who have dreams of accomplishing their vision. It shows that what you can do solely on the talents of your two main stars.
Right.
It is a fantastic story about, you mentioned paranoia, about greed, about like the self-destruction of these people who, seeing what desperation can lead a man or woman to do when pushed into a corner. What happens when, how life has a funny way of punishing you for whenever you try to run away from your problems. There's a lot of great stuff here to check out. So if you've never seen if you've never seen Detour, they both begin with D, so I can get mixed up.
It's very
here.
tough. Double D's. Confuses every man.
But
if you've never seen Double D's, we suggest you do so.
No, that could be another dark corner that can lead another. Besides money, that's another dark corner that can lead a man into. Madness.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, I highly recommend anyone who has an interest in film noir movies to check this out, and to because this does fit into the idea, the themes of film noir. Because even though there's no gangsters in the movie, there's no detectives in this movie, there's very little jazz music here. However, it does play with the dark nature of humanity and is able to present us a tale of people in a no-win scenario where no matter what you do, you will pay for your actions, and you will be screwed by the end. So yeah, however, I want to say the technical aspects does hamper the movie a bit.
Yes,
sometimes
yeah.
in like funny ways,
Yeah.
and like very funny ways, and it could potentially help the sense of scale a bit, especially when you're trying to portray a character going to California and not show California.
Right.
So
Yeah.
but again, that is the nature. But however, it does falter on a technical scale. So as much as I want to give this a 5 out of 5, I will give this a very, very high 4 out of 5. It's like almost
Yeah.
there. But yeah, and the fact that it's free on YouTube, I would I would say that you really have no excuse not to check this movie out if you're a fan of this genre or this stylistic section of cinema.
Yeah, I'd agree with you. I think 4 out of 5 is where I was going, but it was, again, a very high 4 out of 5 because of those weird things like flipping the film, so the climbing into the wrong side of the car, the lack of sets. Nothing to take away from the two main actors did a tremendous job.
Right, right. It's just everything around them. You can feel the cheapness.
Right, right. So it would be what holds me back from putting this on the same 5-star plateau as we did the Maltese Falcon and Double Indemnity. Right. I feel like it's very good, but not quite there yet. So
right, right. But for being a B movie made by a Poverty Row film studio, it definitely succeeded everyone's expectations, and I'm very glad at least one of the actors, mainly the actress who played Vera, was able to live long enough to see the movie and eventually gain this sort of recognition.
yeah, that is pretty cool. And like you said, I'd highly recommend this for anybody. It's easy to track down. There's multiple versions on YouTube. It's only going to take an hour of your time, and it'll be well worth it.
Right, right. So, looks like we've come to the end of another film noir discussion. Thank you very much, everybody, for joining us. If you happen to be a fan of Giant Monster Media, you can check out a series of reviews that Matt and I did that I mentioned at the beginning of this review, which is called Godzilla in Animation, where we go over the history of the numerous adaptations of Godzilla in animation, as the title implies. As of the time of this video, we finished recording our review for Godzilla Planet of the Monsters, the new anime movie that was recently released internationally on Netflix. So you can check out that when, if you feel so inclined to. So
yeah, if you feel inclined to.
Yeah, either the review or the movie. Hopefully.
Yeah.
Either one of them will give you some sense of satisfaction and entertainment. Yeah. I can't guarantee both of them will do so equally.
No.
Let's see. You can be sure to, if you also happen to be a fan of giant robots, I'm currently in the middle of making a giant robot comic. You can check out the Facebook page, Primal Warrior Draco Azul. That is where you can find all the latest up-to-date info on my character, the comic, and everything else related to it. So, do you have anything to pimp out, Matt?
Most people who've listened to your show have heard me plenty of times. They know, follow me on MatthewDenny.com, follow me on Facebook. The Atomic Rex series is out. I've got the third book is out now, Atomic Rex Conquest of Chimera. Working diligently on the much requested Operation Rock sequel. So hopefully to have that out in the next 3 months or so, give or take. It's a target range. So.
All right, then. Excellent, excellent. So, until next time, everybody, I have been Andres Perez.
I've been Matthew Denyon.
And so, as always, take care.